Now that half of 2023 is behind us, Tom, let's take a closer look at the state of the global economy, with a special focus on our favorite enterprise IT industry. As we've discussed, there are many different factors that are impacting the current slowdown in sales of enterprise and cloud technology. There was the overbuying and sort of strange hiring practices that sort of came out of the end of the pandemic. There are the repercussions of the continuing supply chain shortage and production and ramp up and all that. There's the war in Ukraine. There's also major global tensions between US, Europe, and China. There's shifting demand between data center and cloud. And of course, there's a heck of a lot of crime out there. Let's take a look at some of these changes and consider the state of the IT industry in mid 2023. I'll let you kick it off, Tom.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about this supply chain issue that we've seen because we've talked about it a lot here on the rundown. We've talked about the fact that the US is starting to restrict the export of advanced chip making equipment to China. And we were wondering how China was going to respond to that. Well, today, literally this morning, they announced how they were going to do that, and they if you talk about controlling the means of production, here you go. They are announcing as effectively August 1st, there will be export restrictions on germanium and gallium. And if you're not familiar with those two things from high school chemistry, here's the short version. They're used in every chip that's manufactured on the planet. They are semiconductor materials that are required to make super small chips that, when we talk about all those shrinking process nodes. So while the US and its allies are restricting the export of the equipment to manufacture it, China is turning right around and saying, well, if you won't give us the equipment, we won't give you the materials to make stuff. And that follows from the fact that another big source of these types of rare earth materials was Ukraine. And nothing's getting out of there right now. So we're seeing this kind of cat and mouse trade war developing between the two giants of the world economy, and we don't know where it's going to shake out because ultimately we have to have those materials and we have to be able to refine them. So there's going to have to be some kind of negotiation going on there. And as we've seen companies like Intel start to diversify their supply chains for manufacturing outside of the US, we have to wonder if that is going to pay off in the long run at all, because if we can't get a hold of the materials because they're either export locked behind Chinese restrictions, or worse yet, they're in war-torn areas like Ukraine and possibly even Russia where we can't even get to them, what impact will that have down the road? Because we saw what happened when there was a chip shortage during the pandemic. I mean, the price of cars shot through the roof. The price of anything that included a chip was way out of whack. And as it started to slowly come back down, we were thinking, okay, we're going to get back to the real world where prices don't feel like they're quite so inflated. And now it's an artificial supply chain crisis that could potentially be causing problems. And Stephen, I know that that could potentially kind of weigh in on the expansion of a lot of the other companies that we've talked to, like Intel, AMD, and NVIDIA.
Yeah, and that's, I think, an interesting aspect as well. So, I mean, first off, this is breaking news, as you said, with the supply chain restrictions from China here. We'll see what happens with this long term. I actually just got another update while we were recording that one of the key companies in this space, is already seeking an export license that would bypass these restrictions. So it's like, what? It seems to me that China is playing a very strategic game here in terms of basically cleverly dealing out the cards it has. I think the West is also trying to play a strategic game with the cards that it has in terms of advanced process node manufacturing equipment. But then there's sort of I guess, the boots on the ground situation, which is a little harder to determine. One of the challenges of the modern IT world is that we don't have as much visibility into these companies as we did. And it's surprising given the fact that we live in this interconnected world with cloud companies all, wide open. Their products are wide open and visible. The pricing is pretty well known to people in the know, at least. And all of these developments are being very, very closely watched by people like us who are talking about these every single week and talking about the rumors of the next Intel, the next AMD chip, the next NVIDIA chip. Some of these companies are even releasing roadmaps. We actually were very, very happy to see AMD and NVIDIA show us some of the roadmaps of some of the next generation products in public recently, which gives us a little bit of a warm fuzzy that there is going to be a next generation of a lot of these products. But that being said, are these things really taking hold? So if you remember correctly, Intel's fourth generation Xeons, the Sapphire Rapids, along with their Xe graphics GPU technology, all this stuff was delayed, and it was delayed by a number of different factors. In fact, the previous generation was also delayed. There was manufacturing challenges. There was many revisions of the product, and the this allowed AMD to really kind of step ahead of Intel in terms of shipping server CPUs. So the current fourth generation AMD processors that are out there, well, those were intended to compete against the next generation of Intel products, which is one reason that Intel isn't looking so great right now in the data center and the cloud market. But that being said, Intel is really, kind of put on their best show. They're really trying to make a go for it, and they've carved out some interesting niche with Sapphire Rapids. But is it selling? AMD at the same time has recently introduced Bergamo, which is their slimmed down Zen 4 core that allows them to pack as many as 128 onto a single package. Again, this is really cool stuff because this is a full speed, albeit somewhat limited, Zen 4 core, and you can get 256 threads on a single chip. That's phenomenal. But again, the question is, I know it was just released, is it really selling? And then we've got NVIDIA, and NVIDIA just keeps hammering at it with the latest Grace and Hopper CPUs and GPUs out there. They're putting together, they're powering all sorts of supercomputers. Again, the question though is it selling? And in order to find this answer out, it's not quite as easy as you'd think, because these things are not really going to be selling in, your data center or mine. It's not like we can go and ask HPE, like, how many ProLiants did you ship with Bergamo? They're none. That's not what this thing is for. And so what we're going to be doing is kind of looking at what's going on in the cloud market and looking what's going on in the supply chain. And for that, we have to turn to industry analysts. I have good relationships with a number of them, and I've been following them. And what I'm hearing is, well, a little tepid when it comes to Sapphire Rapids and the AMD products as well. Essentially, there just isn't a huge market right now. A lot of the cloud vendors are extending the lifespan of their products. They're trying to get more out of what they already have. There has not been a huge uptake of Sapphire or Genoa or Bergamo yet. Again, it's early, but there really hasn't been a big uptake of that, which means that even though these things were delayed, they're really not selling that well. And then there's NVIDIA, and frankly, NVIDIA amazingly appears to be firing on all cylinders. We're seeing everybody involved in the NVIDIA ecosystem is having trouble keeping up with demand. They're shipping like crazy. There's buying. Again, this is probably drawn by the fact that a lot of the NVIDIA stuff is used in the AI supercomputer binge that we're currently living in. But there again, I think that it's wise to look at this and say, will this continue? Will there be alternatives? I mean, Intel is, as we talked about last week, is right there with their Habana Gaudi, trying to offer a lower priced and moderately competitive product. AMD is there with their GPUs. They're both hungry for what NVIDIA is currently feasting on. And this is a challenge for all of us because, frankly, if these products are not selling, if the cloud vendors aren't buying, if the hyperscalers aren't buying, if the enterprise is still in the midst of a slowdown, it doesn't bode well for a lot of us. And this leads me to question, why is it that the enterprise is in a bit of a slowdown? I mean, it could be because of the transition from on-premises data center to cloud, but it could also be that the enterprise is just wrapped up in a lot of other challenges right now. Isn't that true, Tom?
Yeah, it is, because as we look at the fact that we're trying to get these hardware refreshes done, and we're trying to decide, do we stay here? Do we need to move to the cloud? It's not like that is a green field of opportunity that is not being challenged. And one of the things that we're seeing still is a huge spate in ransomware. But this isn't your dad's ransomware, where it's just some kid who deploys a file locker on your system. This is coordinated, massive kinds of things. I mean, Clop was probably the latest word that came out. Everyone's like, what is that? Well, it exploited a file transfer exploit that allowed you to like get control of a lot of these appliances that people use to move large files around. And it basically caused a lot of havoc to the point where the US federal government's offering a bounty to find these people. And we thought that at least in the latter half of 2022, that maybe some of the stuff was going to slow down because, as most people kind of know, a lot of the gangs that do this stuff work out of certain Eastern European countries that are currently at war with certain other European countries. And so it was like, well, are those people being tasked to do other things? And the answer is they were. And then they got, kind of reassigned a little bit. But more importantly, they've outsourced all of those efforts. And we're starting to see these more collectivist, almost like organized crime hacking things going on. And it's becoming more and more targeted. Like, I'm not just looking to see where I can kick in the front door of your organization. I'm looking for every possible way that I can sneak in. I'm trying to exploit things that may not have been updated, or try to find ways that I get in and stay in. I mean, we covered the Barracuda Network's email security appliance hack, where Barracuda just said, just rip them out and get a new one. Like, we can't even fix it, or it's so expensive we're not even going to try. Like, that is the thing that worries me, because we've seen a lot of data protection companies that historically have been focused on backup and recovery kind of pivot in a way to looking at this ransomware problem, which to me says it's big enough that it's being noticed outside of the security industry. And like we've said in many times in the past, if we wanted to just include a breach story in every episode of the rundown, we would have to pick from a list, because there have been so many and they have been so big. Like, this is on the order of causing millions and billions of dollars worth of losses on a regular basis, that is having a material impact, as we mentioned earlier with the SolarWinds story, to get other agencies involved. And we're getting to the point where it's going to have to start becoming more offensive. We've seen that in Australia, where according to Risky Business, they've kind of unleashed the hounds, if you will. U.S. Cyber Command is being more involved in some of these offensive operations. They're offering their expertise and kind of guiding people into how to do this. And I think that we, as we look at the other story that I talked about, where you have this kind of burgeoning trade war, we're getting to a point where we're having a burgeoning cybersecurity war. But the hard part there is that this isn't fought between governments with ideology and laws and trade restrictions. This is fought between attackers and defenders who, in many cases, while they may be sheltered by a country, they don't directly work for them. So a lot of the recourse that we would typically have to, say, have that person extradited is difficult to do. There was a news story that came out last week where a wanted person by the US government showed up in Kazakhstan and was arrested by the Kazakhstan police, and the US wants him exported. And then all of a sudden, the Russians, because he is a Russian national, found out that he had committed crimes years ago that supersede the U.S. crimes, and they want him extradited back to Russia to, answer for those crimes, if you will. And that's the cat and mouse game that we're going to start playing. Is, if these people are backed by state actors, what happens when the states get involved but not really involved? If a U.S. Offensive hacker is arrested in a foreign country and faces extradition to a place that he performed operations against, what is the U.S. going to do? Because these things are going to spiral out of control. And when we're dealing with multi-gigabit DDoSes, when we're dealing with file lockers that attack base level things, when we're talking about the ability to completely destroy cloud data lake repositories with the touch of a button, we're quickly reaching we're quickly reaching mutually assured destruction on a cyber information scale that I've never seen before.
Yeah, it's really incredible what's going on in the information security space right now. And I think that it's easy to sort of be a little bit jaded by it, because of course this stuff has been happening. Yeah. There's been intrusions and ransomware and whatever, but it's different now. It used to be that the entire industry was, metaphorically speaking, focused on bars for windows and better doors and better locks. Well, now we're focusing on bandages and detection systems inside. We're focusing on increasing the patrols outside. It's like we've almost thrown in the towel with conventional security, and we're now realizing that we're fighting a very different war against a much more prepared adversary. And a lot of that, as you said, a lot of that goes to these global geopolitical issues. It's been true for a long time that the world's governments supported some forms of cybercrime, and especially if it benefited their interests. Well, now it seems like they're overtly supporting cybercrime, and that's really, really bad situation to be in. And this is really distracting the industry. It's causing all sorts of problems, and it promises really to disrupt a lot of what we're seeing. Frankly, if you're going to be rolling out a new connected application, you really need to be worried about cybercrime. You really need to be worried about international geopolitical cyber gangs, upsetting your platform, rather than just DevOps and rolling into production and high availability, that sort of thing. Um, and all of this, I think, is really causing havoc in terms of the normal functioning of the IT industry. Whether it is restrictions on supply chain and commodities, whether it's geopolitical forces beyond our control, wars and things like that, whether it is cybercrime, whether it is the rollout of technology or the disruptive potential from the data center to the cloud, all of this is causing problems for the industry that we all work in. And for that, I'm going to sort of finish up this look at where do we stand in the middle of 2023 with a somewhat pessimistic note. I think a lot of us had looked at 2023 and thought, you know what? The industry is going to start recovering. We're just in a bit of a downturn. We're going to start recovering here in the second half of 2023. I even heard people predicting that we were already in a recovery in the second quarter of 2023. Well, that ain't happening. In fact, I'm going to go on record right now and I'm going to say that we're not going to see a strong rebound in enterprise and cloud spending, enterprise and cloud technology, new companies, hiring, all of these things that we care about here in the Gestalt IT community. We're not going to see a rebound of that until 2024. That's my prediction. I'm sad to be saying that, but that's just how I see it.
Yeah, I think you're right, Stephen. I think that we're not out of the woods yet. We still face a whole lot of challenges, and I would love for things to be rosy, but unfortunately the pessimist in me says that we've got a little bit more to go before we get there.